It's an honour to be invited to come and do this at the AGM, but I'm painfully aware that having given this talk twice in us already, some people here might have heard it before. So I thought I'd make some changes. In fact, I've made a lot of changes, and the talk is now about Judith Durham. I'm afraid that might not get a laugh, you might take it seriously. No, it's about Robert Hooke. Now, I am what my mother would have described as an inveterate letter writer, not of the disgruntled of Tunbridge Wells type, but of the you might be interested to learn type. And the second most common letter I write is about a grave disservice many journalists do to one of Robert Hooke's greatest achievements. And I wonder if anybody here who knows of Robert Hooke might be able to guess what that is. A show of hands, anybody have any idea? It is this. Everybody describes that as one of Wren's greatest achievements. The Dome of St. Paul's was designed by Robert Hooke. It was signed off by Wren because he was the architect. It was designed by Robert Hooke. Most people who know of Robert Hooke will describe him as, well, wasn't he the man who played about with springs? Well, yes, he was. And he formulated Hooke's law, which effectively is stress is proportional to strain. And that is the most important thing Hooke did. So, thanks for listening. Any questions? He wrote in his, again, this said, don't bother, no one will laugh. He wrote in his diary that, that's a code for this, ut tension sic vis, as the tension, so the force. He was ahead of his game in virtually everything, and obviously worried that people might nick his ideas, so that's why it was written in code. Tension versus force, or pull versus push, which covers everything. If you lift an object, you're pulling it against Earth's gravitational attraction. The moons of Jupiter are in orbit, the centrifugal force spinning them out and the gravitational force putting them back in balance. Our solar system is balanced. A pendulum swings out and is pulled back by the force of gravity, and it describes a sine wave like that, which is the same as sea waves and sound waves and waves in a piece of electronic equipment. And a bit of a sine wave is a pulse, which affects us and our brains and everything. Hooke's law. James Clerk Maxwell, Scottish physicist James Clerk Maxwell, said it's the most important law in all science because it covers absolutely everything. The Dome of St. Paul's.
My guest today is a man whose very name is his introduction. Sir David Attenborough, presenter of astonishing natural history documentaries for more than 50 years. Whom have you chosen to nominate as your great life, and why?
I have chosen Robert Hooke, I suppose primarily because I know so little about him.
So, you're not alone. I'll play that again.
I have chosen Robert Hooke, I suppose primarily because I know so little about him.
Well, there you are. We'll have a look at a small selection of Hooke's discoveries. Universal coupling was previously known as Hooke's joint. And that's his original etching. He designed and built Boyle's vacuum pump that Boyle used to establish Boyle's law. He designed the first barometer. And with that, he founded, effectively, meteorology, 200 years before Captain Fitzroy. He didn't invent, but he refined the microscope. He drew that picture of a fly's eye. And he wrote a magnificent book, which we'll talk about later on, Micrographia. This is a very famous drawing. That's one of Hooke's. That was a pull-out. in the days before we had pull-outs. That was a pull-out. And
That's
that,
to a jump out.
well done, yes. That prompted Jonathan Swift to write, "Big fleas have little fleas upon their backs to bite them, and little fleas have lesser fleas," and so on, ad infinitum. Robert Hooke was the first person to establish why nettles sting. You notice those silica shards under a microscope. Looking at a piece of cork under a microscope, you notice that it was lined up like cells, monks' cells in a monastery. Robert Hooke coined the word cell as a unit of biological life. You notice Newton's rings before Newton. He was the first therefore to propose the wave theory of light. He examined fossils under a microscope. With his telescope, he examined the surface of the moon. He wondered why there are fossils on the top of mountains and why there are no craters on Earth as there are on the moon. And he thought, aha, that's because the Earth's surface must be moving. He was the founder of geology before James Hutton. I have a note here from the Transaction of the Geological Society of London. Hooke's System of the Earth, as expressed in his Discourse of Earthquakes, published posthumously in 1705, embodies some fundamental concepts about the Earth that are startlingly on target and markedly different from other theories of the Earth expressed by his contemporaries. Hutton clearly benefited considerably from Hooke's ideas. Hooke's writings show that he derived many of his geological hypotheses from knowledge gained during his childhood of the processes taking place on the shores of the Isle of Wight. The next step, pertinent to us, is he realised that throughout known history and before, there have been many extinctions. He didn't know how it happened, but he understood that evolution was a fact. That was 200 years before Darwin and Russell Wallace. He examined flights. He realised that we didn't have muscles appropriate to birds, so we wouldn't be able to fly like birds, but he did posit the idea of a hot air balloon 100 years before the Montgolfier brothers. He's known in some circles as Britain's Leonardo. There is Christopher Wren's plan of the City of London. Not really. It should be Robert Hooke's plan of the City of London. Over 10 years, he measured every building plot in London, and Lisa Jardine's book is called The Man Who Measured London. As you said, he designed the Dome of St Paul's, and he designed the monument. More about that later on. He designed a balanced watch spring. He didn't have the idea of a bimetal strip that Christian Huygens did, so it wasn't entirely accurate because it varied with temperature. But that was before John Harrison had the idea. He designed the anchor escapement. And there's Hooke's drawing and his drawing of the relative dimensions. He posited the idea that planets rotate round each other. All celestial bodies whatsoever have an attraction towards their own centres, which we know as gravity. He predicted it. The inflection of direct motion onto a curve by supervening attractive principles. And he predicted planetary motion. He said any object set in a straight line would continue to move in a straight line unless some other power deflected it, which is the first law of motion. He predicted that. And that, in my childhood, caused me to wonder about this. I can't hold this speed for much longer, Captain. Well, in space, you don't do anything. You just hold that speed automatically. You need power to slow yourself down. He said, these attractive powers are stronger near the centre of the attracting body. Now, what these several degrees are, I have not yet experimentally determined. That is the inverse square law. He predicted it, but he couldn't prove it. And of course his experiments with springs and Hooke's law. So Robert Hooke discovered or predicted most of physics. And in the Encyclopedia of Scientific Instruments, Lord Kelvin gets 18 mentions, Carl Zeiss 18, Isaac Newton 9, James Clerk Maxwell 8, Robert Hooke has 32 bits of important scientific apparatus. Why has he been forgotten? History is written by those who write history, Churchill said. Here are some examples of that. Tiberius. As far as we know, there's nothing dreadfully wrong with Tiberius, but Suetonius was paid to brief against him, and we understand from Suetonius that Tiberius was a bit of a monster. We know these as Arabic numerals. They're not. They're Hindu numerals, but they came to us through the Arabian Peninsula, so we know them as Arabic numerals. Fibonacci series there. We know the name Fibonacci, but that wasn't his name at all. His name was Leonardo da Bonacci, and this fellow wrote a biography of him and called him Fibonacci, son of Bonacci. Iona Abbey, where Columba came and brought Christianity to British shores, British mainland, in 463 AD, but not really. St. Catherine came to the Isle of Bute in 552 AD, 11 years earlier. But there was an important hagiography written by an abbot of Iona Abbey, and that's what people remember. So they remember Columba, but not Catherine. Here's an interesting thing. Here's Lindisfarne, and there's a map. There's Iona there, Lindisfarne is there. There's, on Loch Lomond, there's an island in Savannah, the island of the Saint there, and there's a medieval chapel there in Luss, and a medieval chapel there in Balmahal. And if you draw a line through those, it goes right through the middle of Inchvahanna. But if you extrapolate it, it goes through Iona and Lindisfarne. Isn't that weird? Hooke's Tragedy by Sir Isaac Newton. He was Newton's nemesis. Newton was a very proud man, and obviously Hooke had got to all these things before him, and Newton didn't like that at all. The disputes were wide-ranging. Newton's rings, the wave theory of light, gravity, inverse square law, laws of motion. In every case, Isaac Newton was credited with the discovery, but Hooke had actually got there first. In 1703, Newton was made president of the Royal Society. They had to move premises. He said, we don't have room for all Hooke's papers, so we better just burn them. So Christopher Wren, his biography was written by his son, who completely failed to mention Hooke. Neither is there a contemporary likeness. That was said to be Robert Hooke, but it's not. It's Jean-Baptiste van Helmont, whom some of you will know coined the word gas from the Greek chaos. Now, a visit by Zacharias, I've got some notes here to remind me, I can't remember everything. Zacharias von Uffenbach, he advised Hans Sloane on the collection that eventually became the British Museum. But when he visited the Royal Society, he said the best things there are the portraits of its members, of which the most noteworthy are those of Mr. Boyle and Mr. Hooke. But then, a visit by James Young, he was a naval surgeon, attributed with the first, I have to say, his first successful brain surgery. There might have been brain surgery before that was unsuccessful, that wasn't written about. But he was a friend of Hooke's, and he said, in the council room, I viewed diverse original pictures, including those of Sir Robert Hooke and Mr. Hack. So it wasn't Hooke at all. It was Theodore Hack, who was a Dutchman, who was a translator for the Royal Society. There's no mention in the Royal Society minutes of a portrait by Hooke. All we have in Hooke's diary as a note, 16th of October 1674, at Garraway's left off taking tobacco, Mr. Bonest drew picture. Now we know of a Bonest, and that's in the National Portrait Gallery, Arthur Jackson by David Logan after Bonest. That's all we know. There was nothing in inventory of Hooke's effects. But we do have a description. John Aubrey, great lives. John Aubrey was one of the first archaeologist to look at Stonehenge, notably Avery, he looked at. But in Brief Lives, he wrote this.
He is but of middling stature, something crooked, pale-faced, but his head is large, his eye full and popping, oh gosh, and not quick, a grey eye. He has a delicate head of hair and of an excellent moist curl.
There is a portrait now in Gresham College, but it's a modern portrait. Something crooked. Hooke was a hunchback. He had a condition called Schauman's kyphosis, a curvature of the spine, which looks like that. So, as a result of that, he was of below average stature. And if you care to look at the edge of a £2 coin, you'll see it says, standing on the shoulders of giants. This quotation comes from a letter by Newton to Hooke, and it alludes in part to the Greek idea of somebody leading a blind giant. But in that letter, he wrote, "We have done much in several ways, and especially in taking the colours on thin plates into philosophical considerations. If I have seen further, it is by standing on the shoulders of giants." So he was, of course, referring to the Greek philosophers, but not to Hooke, who was of below average stature. So that is a swipe at Hooke. If I have seen further, standing on the shoulders of the giants, and has nothing to do with you. And there's that painting again by Rita Greer. He was born during the Civil War on the Isle of Wight in Freshwater, which is there. His father was a local rector, the Reverend John Hooke, and it's no longer there, but that's the cottage where he was born. There's a memorial to him there now. He was a gifted child. He was an accomplished draftsman. He made his own drawing materials, dismantled a clock and made a working model of it in wood. He crafted a sailing ship with working guns. Aubrey writes, he made a small ship a yard long with rigging and ropes, pulleys, etc., and a contrivance to make it fire off some small guns as it crossed a haven of pretty breadth. And he said it performed tolerably well. Charles I fled the mainland and came to the Isle of Wight. He escaped Hampton Court, arrived in Hampshire, messaged Robert Hammond at Carisbrooke Castle, asking for protection. Robert Hammond realised that he was on the wrong side there, so he actually kept the king captive in Carisbrooke Castle. And his father was a local rector, would have met the king, and probably Hooke did too. So Hooke was a royalist. His father died in October 1648. He'd made his will a month earlier, and there's some speculation that it might have been suicide. But Hooke was then sent off to be an artist or a limner. He was sent to London with £40 and books on a wooden chest to learn his craft. The Reverend Cardell Goodman was his escort. Cardell Goodman was from Isle of Wight. He had been a student at Christ Church, Oxford, but he got sent down, interestingly, for defacing a portrait of the Duke of Monmouth. Hooke was apprenticed to Peter Lely, whom you might know. Peter Lely was a painter to the royal court, and the best known thing about Peter Lely is Oliver Cromwell, warts and all. Cromwell said to Mr. Lely, "I desire you would use all your skill to paint my picture truly, and not flatter me at all, but remark all these pimples, warts, and everything as you see, otherwise I will not pay you a farthing." Hooke didn't stay with Lely, as Aubrey says, with whom he was initially on trial, but he quickly perceived what was to be done, so I thought, why cannot I do this myself and keep the £100? Cardell Goodman was a royalist and a former pupil at Westminster School, as indeed was Wren. and Nick Clegg. Richard Busby, the school principal, was a royalist. He seemed to run two schools. He had the school for wealthy children of wealthy parents, and a separate school for gifted children from a poor background. And Hooke was one of these. So as Hooke had no means to pay fees, he received a stipend as a chorister, and that covered the cost. He learned music. He was taught maths by Dr. John Wilkins. John Wilkins, Anglican clergyman, he became master of colleges at both Oxford and Cambridge and Bishop of Chester. We'll come on to him later on. Later became the principal of Wadham College. Master Duke of Elements, went up to Oxford, a royalist town, and joined Cardinal Goodman at Christ Church. Again, he had no means to pay his fees, so he was retained as a chorister and a servitor, a servant, like a batman to Mr. Goodman. And there he was introduced to Thomas Willis. Hooke was hired as Willis's assistant and was welcomed into Dr. Wilkins' circle. Now, Thomas Willis was a noted anatomist. We'll come on to him again a bit later as well. And he met Christopher Wren there, Christopher Wren had been at school 8 years before him, but they had met at school. So for the mid-1640s, he was in the group that met at Gresham College, 1645 group to discuss natural philosophy. The great minds of the day, you might say. Among these were Theodore Hooke, whom we mentioned, the translator. William Harvey. You know about Harvey, De Mortis Cordis, analysis of the circulation of the blood, and a great anatomist. Thomas Willis, again anatomist, he found the circle of Willis, which provides the blood supply to the brain. William Petty, he wrote the Political Arithmetic, which was a precursor to Karl Marx. Karl Marx refers to it, and Smith in The Wealth of Nations. But between them, they took on the case of Anne Green. Anne Green was a servant lady who had had a miscarriage, but was accused of murder, and she was sentenced to be hanged, but she didn't die. And she was sentenced to be hanged again, but they argued her case, and she was pardoned. And Dr. John Wilkins, the real character of philosophical language, he developed a language of his own devising, which looks like that: a language, a writing system, and a metric system of measurement. This is the Lord's Prayer, but you'll notice at the beginning he starts, "Dear our parent, not our father." Interesting, all that way back. It wasn't a very good book though. Wilkins himself made such a mistake in an essay using gauge for barley, where he apparently meant gape, and tulip was meant. Right, then we had the interregnum, the protectorate. They had to decamp to Oxford to escape the Roundheads. Wilkins was by now master at Wadham College, and they met in the master's lodgings, and they became known as the Oxford Group. Hooke and Wren both attended. Then in 1953, Wilkins secured a job for Hooke as an assistant to Robert Boyle. Boyle, as you'll know, was a very wealthy Scotsman who dabbled, and it was probably Boyle that Hooke that came up with Boyle's law. He built the vacuum pump, which looks like that, and there's Boyle's law. 1658, Dr. Wilkins married Cromwell's sister, so they were welcome now amongst the Roundheads. The Oxford Group was now well connected, which meant they could move back to London. The meetings were held again at Gresham College, unofficially known as the Lunar Society, because they had their meetings. It wasn't done to walk about on a dark night for obvious reasons, so they had their meetings when there was a full moon. Not to be confused with the Lunar Society of Birmingham, which was Telford and Stevenson and the later engineers. 1660, the monarchy was restored, and Charles II issued a royal warrant, so the Lunar Society became the Royal Society. Hooke still worked with Boyle by day, but was a curator to the Royal Society at night. And in 63, Hooke was elected a Fellow of the Royal Society and given rooms at Gresham College. The Gresham Professor of Geometry resigned. The post carried a salary of £80 a year. Hooke applied, but the post was given to Arthur Dacres. Hooke met a patron of his, Sir John Cutler. John Cutler said if the Royal Society would take Hooke on, he would subsidise the salary and pay £50 a year towards that 80 quid. The Royal Society agreed. Hooke got the job, but he was cheated by the Royal Society. Arthur Cutler never paid, so he only got £30 a year. 1665, the first issue of the Philosophical Transaction of the Royal Society, the world's first scientific journal. Hooke and Wen were both involved. Hooke was now a fellow of the Royal Society, official curator to the Royal Society, Gresham Professor of Geometry, so Hooke was directly involved in the world's first scientific journal and at the same time pursuing his own investigations. Have a look at his legacy. He developed the microscope. He was the first to observe in detail the cell, mould, sandstone, which they call Kentish stone, fossils, kidney stones, feathers, microscopic parts of creatures, Newton's rings, and much, much more. He developed the microscope, he made a machine for grinding lenses and mirrors, he built telescopes, he built timepieces, he designed a micrometer for a sextant, he advised Newcomen on steam engines, he designed improved suspension for carriages, made a weather clock, just like that, based on the aneroid barometer. He introduced a standard for cloud types, he defined the 0 degrees on the temperature scale, he introduced the spirit level. He didn't design it, it was designed by this fellow. It amazes me how these people do so many other things. I'm working on a talk just now about Jasper Meskelin, who was a magician who was instrumental in us winning the war in North Africa. His grandfather was a magician, not only designed the QWERTY keyboard, but also made the penny slot for public loos. This fellow here, whose name I'm not going to try and pronounce, he invented the breaststroke. Hooke built the first diving helmet, like that, designed a bathymeter, a thing for measuring ocean depths, which looked like that, and a device for sampling deep oceans. He built an improved harpoon gun, he investigated nitro aerial spirit, which we now know as oxygen, and congruity, the nature of matter. He dropped objects from St. Paul's, and it established that gravity varies with height, hence the inverse square law. This St. Paul's reference is pertinent later on. And there's his spring. He looked at the behaviour of elastic materials. He was the founder of material science. Elasticity involved in civil engineering and mechanical engineering, in electronics, in thermodynamics, in geology, in cosmology, in music, in acoustics, meteorology, as we said before, in everything. The wave function. Not many people know this. Olivia Newton-John, her father, Bryn Newton-John, worked at Bletchley Park. And his father, Max Born, got a Nobel Prize for his statistical analysis of the wave function. You didn't know that about Olivia Newton-John, did you? Sir Isaac Newton. There we are. Nature and nature's laws lay hid by night. God said, let Newton be, and all was light.
It could not last, the devil howling ho, let Einstein be, restore the status quo.
Oh, there you go. Right, what Newton had that Hooke didn't have is this, effectively. The scientists amongst you, this will be old hat. But for those who aren't, that's a square. It's obviously got 4 sides. There's a hexagon, it's got 6 sides, the sides are shorter. There's an octagon, it's beginning to look more like a circle. It's got straight lines for sides, but they're shorter. Much shorter sides there, and we can go on and on. The sides get shorter and shorter, but you'll notice it's still composed of straight lines. A circle, therefore, is infinitely short straight lines. And the analysis of infinitely short straight lines was known then as fluxions. We call it calculus now, and that's how it looks when it's written down. There's another contest between Gottfried Leibniz and Isaac Newton, who got there first. But in deep physics, you need calculus to make proofs of things. Hooke didn't have access to calculus, which is why he could only posit, he couldn't prove. So, micrographia. I meant to bring around a copy of micrographia, a modern copy. It doesn't matter, it's just a book with pictures in it. What people said about it is more important. Physiological descriptions of minute bodies made by the magnifying glass with observations and inquiries thereupon. That was the title of his book. In 1661, Charles II requested microscopic studies. Wren completed a few, but to put it bluntly, his heart wasn't in it. He had better things to do. So Dr. Wilkins suggested Hooke takes over. He started in earnest for the Royal Society, and Peter Inwood, the man who knew too much, said he began rather unpromisingly with images of frozen urine, but between April and December he presented 40 studies of insects and other small creatures. So he improved the microscope. He presented more images every Wednesday, from deer hair and dog's blood to nematode worms and bee stings. Hooke had the idea for the book. He petitioned the council, but they were a bit concerned he might say something contentious. They couldn't influence his mind, and they had their concerns. Radical thinking might lead the Royal Society into disrepute, but they were happy with Hooke's disclaimer. That his conjecture and queries were not done by your direction, and the Royal Society licensed and funded the work. Epistemology is important here. Cartesianism is a scientific truth based on innate ideas and deductive reasoning. Aristotelianism is the opposite. Sense is fallible. Experiment and factual evidence are essential for proof. Now, prior to Hooke, most research was done just on instinct and intuition, and then you would look for proofs. You'd conjure up ideas to demonstrate that what you believed was true. Hooke did the other way around. He did experiments, found what was true, and then wrote about it afterwards. He wrote, "Mankind's powers of observation have been undermined by negligence and intemperance. Memory and reason can be restored to their original perfection by mechanical and experimental philosophy." And there we have micrographia. His book contained hypotheses on light and colour, combustion and heat. It was supposed to be about microscopic things, but it covered a wide range of things. Medicinal plants, instinct and mechanics in animals, congruity of the nature of matter, the changing shape of the earth, craters and volcanoes, formation of clouds, falling objects and gravity. And there's that pull out and flee. Samuel Pepys wrote, "In the bindery I saw Mr. Hooke's book of the microscope being prepared and found it so pretty that I ordered a copy." His entry of the 20th of January 1666. A most excellent piece of which I am very proud. He went on, he sat up until 2 o'clock reading the most ingenious book that ever I read in my life. So Hooke writes, on the point of a sharp needle, he says, the image we have here exhibited was the top of a very sharp needle, whose point appeared through the microscope to have been big enough to have afforded 100 armed mites room enough to be arranged by each other without endangering or breaking off each other's necks or being thrust off either side. He goes on, the surface is roughened by so many marks of rudeness and bungling. The colours of Muscovy glass. Muscovy glass is the effect of light being refracted through a thin layer, like that, which comes down to Newton's rings. The challenge we have here is that, scientists will understand this, the wave here has to go a little further than the wave there. So you get an interference pattern, the same as you would if you're standing inside a harbour, you see the waves coming off the sea, and then they spread out, there's another gap here, they form an interference pattern, which looks like that. Or when it's coloured, looks like that. On the surface of steel, he wrote, and so onwards by these consecutions, white, yellow, orange, minium, scarlet, purple, blue, watch it, and so on. Minium and watch it. We've forgotten these names. Minium is red lead. And watch it is a very pale blue, caused by a high proportion or a high concentration of alabaster in the cliffs around Watchet. There's also a colour we've forgotten about, puke, which is that colour, which is where we get puke stocking knave from. On the contexture of feathers, this gives away the fact that it's pre-Darwin. Nature does not only work mechanically, but in such excellent and compendious contrivances that it is impossible for all the reason in the world to find out any contrivance to do the same thing that should have more convenient properties. He adds, and can any be so sottish as to think that those things are the productions of chance? Certainly either their rationalification, exact thinking, must be extremely depraved, or they did never attentively contemplate the works of the Almighty. He says, Sir Christopher Wren, again, 1666 and 1661, Wren had published a paper, New Designs Tending to Strength, Convenience and Beauty in Buildings. Strength, there we are, stress is proportional to strain. He was invited to advise on restoring St Paul's Cathedral, and 27th of August 1666 his proposal was accepted. Then on Saturday the 1st of September, the third great fire, that was when the fire started in Thomas Tower in his bakery. Probably an explosion. Suspension of flour in air is an explosive mixture. In Pudding Lane, possibly following an explosion, and citizens tried to create a fire break. They had special hooks to pull down houses to create a fire break, but the Lord Mayor was hesitant, and the fire burned for 5 days, petered out at Pie Corner. Petered out comes from the French, also partridge and petard, all come from the same quality. Sportive engineered by hoist by his own petard, and they all come from the French word peter, to fart. Partridge because of the noise it makes when it's flying. So 13,000 houses and 87 churches were destroyed. Samuel Pepys wrote in his diary, and I did dig a pit in the garden and laid in there all the papers of my office, and I put in our wine in it as well as my Parmesan cheese. Hooke and Wren were working together now. They drew up a plan to rebuild the city. Wren presented it to the king, and Hooke presented it to the Royal Society. Wren was asked to manage the project, and Hooke was hired to survey London. Over the next 10 years, he personally measured every building plot. So Wren was in overall charge. He opened 3 offices, including one in Whitehall, employed 3 teams of draftsmen, but pivotal as Wren's assistant and chief designer was Robert Hooke. Despite his increased workload, Hooke continued with his experiments. St Paul's was now to be rebuilt, so he needed another tall structure. What was he going to do? Not many people know this. It's more than just a monument. There's a laboratory under the monument. There's a hole in the floor, which you would think is a drain, but it's not. It's a receptacle for a lens. There's a hatch in the top, and you put a lens in the top, and the monument was Wren's personal zenith telescope. Every step, when it was built, was exactly 6 inches high, so he didn't have to measure. He could just count the steps and multiply. Another interesting thing, the monument is the only place in London where you can see all the Roman numerals individually in the wrong order, backwards, because if you write that out, it spells 1666. The far side in Pudding Lane, hence the monument, finished at Pye Corner, hence that golden boy at Pye Corner. And as we mentioned before, the Dome of St Paul's. Hooke's other notable buildings, mostly destroyed now. The Royal College of Physicians was designed by Hooke. Merchant Taylor School was designed by Hooke. Escott House, that was designed for the Young family, the brain surgeon man. St Benet's Kentish Town, St Edmund's City of London, the church in Milton Keynes, and Bethlehem Royal Hospital was designed by Robert Hooke, what became known as Bedlam. The pace of his life left Hooke exhausted. He suffered increasing mobility issues. Acquaintances worried about how thin he was. 7th of March, 1703, he died in his rooms. In death, as in life, he was not an attractive sight. His ragged clothes were twisted round his emaciated body, and lice were so thick on the corpse, there was no going near him. John Aubrey wrote. His rooms were in disarray. No will could be found. Only 3,000 books. And he still had with him his father's chest that he had when at 14 years old he left Freshwater. And in that chest was £8,000 in gold sovereigns. He was one of the wealthiest men in London. That's £6 million in today's money. There's a plaque to him. All Hooke's possessions were destroyed. There was apparently no portrait. Sir Isaac Newton was elected president of the Royal Society. The Royal Society was to be relocated. No room for Hooke's papers, according to the new president. The motto of the Royal Society, nullis in verba, take nothing on trust. Well, you can't, can you? That's the memorial at Freshwater. We have the portrait at Gresham College. On the base of the monument, there's that plaque. There's a plaque in St Paul's Cathedral. There's a paving slab in Westminster Abbey. All his discoveries, too numerous to mention again. There's the microscope, most important. And today, Hooke's law. Every building you can see there is dependent upon Hooke's law. Stress is proportional to strain. There's a Hooke crater on the moon, and there's a Hooke crater on Mars. There's an asteroid named after him. That plaque is at St Helens Bishopsgate, in the shadow of the Shard, which, as we've said, was built using Hooke's law. And his flea. I'll do my best to answer any questions. Preferably not on Robert Hooke. Yeah.
Did he have assistants like the artists at the time? He must have had people helping.
No, he was assistant to other people. No, he worked on his own. He was always considered the poor boy of the Royal Society. Like in so many things, when you come in at ground level, in order to get on, you often have to move to somewhere else. Had he gone to, if there was something else, like an equivalent body, with all his knowledge, if he'd gone there, he'd probably been revered. But he was the boy. He was always the boy. It's only grudgingly they allowed him to, they couldn't really not allow him to become a fellow, but no, he didn't have assistants. He worked tirelessly on his own.
So he didn't have a family then to support him?
He didn't have family, no. There is some evidence he had a niece living with him, and there is some evidence that he had a not entirely wholesome relationship with her. It seems to be the only interaction he had with women, but he didn't have family, no, at all.
There were some rumours about the kitchen maids.
Yeah, well, that applied, that was across the board, same with Pete, wasn't it?
He wouldn't have had much time, would he?
No, I suppose not, no.
happened to his wealth then?
He died intestate. I don't know, probably went to the Royal Society.
No, when his niece had it.
Then well, there was no will. So I don't know. Actually, I don't know the answer to that question. There's a gap in my knowledge there.
You mentioned earlier on that, trying to think of the words you used, but anyway, that he had some sort of difficult personality.
Yeah.
And you haven't said anything about that alongside of all his
It's difficult to know.
achievements.
I think from what we know now, I think it's pretty obvious that most of these high achievers were autistic. They all had difficult relationships with people. Even Darwin had difficult relationships with people, and they were driven. And in my experience, my personal experience, autistic people get obsessed with the most trivial things and won't let go until it's done. Now, sometimes these trivial things move on to be great things. Sometimes they don't. But I think it's fairly obvious that he was autistic.
But is it possible then that some of his personality characteristics impacted upon the people around him, which then caused him to be, if you like, denigrated?
Oh yeah. He wasn't a well-liked person. He was respected because he was a hard worker, but he wasn't liked as a person. But then neither was Newton. Anything else? Just before I go on.
You had a quotation about standing on the shoulders of giants.
Yes.
I wondered which way around it was. Was he really making a disparaging
He was.
about Hooke?
It was a double-edged sword. He was saying, I relied upon these people, but not you. I need these people, I don't need you. Very clever.
But did he actually say, I don't need you?
No, it's implicit. He wrote to Robert Hooke. That was a letter he wrote to Robert Hooke. What I've learned by standing on the shoulder of giants. And Hooke was the antithesis of a giant. Hooke was because.
But is that your interpretation?
It's generally held view.
Okay.
Just before I finish, Askin Bloom quiz on the 14th of April, and I don't know who the mayor's going to be then, but Michael Barnett and I are next year doing another concert for the Mayor of Usk Charities, Flanders and Swan and Jake Thackeray. For those of you who don't know Michael Barnett, he is the principal pianist in the Glasgow Royal Conservatoire, and he very kindly flies down here to accompany me for these concerts. For information and bookings, that's my email address, ian@solarpanels.wales, or indeed advice on solar panels. There we are. Thank you very much.